my first break was doing top of the hour IDs so all the disc jockeys can take a day off for Thanksgiving. So I was there, literally, I think it was a 12-hour shift. And all I did, and I had the world's highest voice. At the top of the hour, right before the top of the hour, I would call my mom and say, Mom, I'm going to talk right now. And then she would listen. And then at the top of the hour, I'd go, KBZT San Diego. And then that was it.
Benztown President Dave Chachi Dennis loves radio and all of his radio friends.
Hey, Chachi.
Hey, everybody.
Because Chachi loves everybody.
I am so excited about my next guest. I don't know if he knows this or not, but I absolutely revere him, and he was such an influence on me and my career. And I can say that without a doubt, I would not be where I am today if it weren't for him and what I learned from him. He has produced legendary shows such as the Jeff and Jer Showgram. He's the creator of Breaking and Entering Christmas. He won a Mark Twain Award for a documentary called Oxy, What Your Kids Aren't Telling You. And he's the only producer ever inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame. I am so happy to welcome little Tommy Sablan to the podcast. Hi, Tommy.
You know what, Mr. Dennis, Chachi, I feel like I should be interviewing you. And you know, I hear a lot of great things about you over the years and what you have done for yourself and for the business. So, you know, God bless you. And you know what? Here's the producers, because as you know, I have a liking to the job of being a producer. And I know through the years, through the decades, through the hundreds of years of radio, people don't respect producers. And people don't understand what a producer does. And I think you did, you do, and that's why you're so successful today. So my job is to back up and be proud and to root for the producer of a radio and a television show.
What I don't know, I think probably a lot of people don't know, I got my start at KFMB in San Diego, Star 100.7 in 1996. And Tommy was at the station with Jeff and Jer and producing and just on an amazing run. Obviously, that show is just a phenomenal show. And I started literally answering phones at the radio station. And my goal was to be like little Tommy. I mean, I don't think that there is anyone, honestly, I rank you as the best producer. And I've got a ton of respect for Dennis Clark, and I got to work with Paul Joseph and certainly Baba Booey, and there's so many fantastic producers out there, but you really are absolutely the gold standard, and I think the producer that just virtually everyone looks up to. I know also Bert, you were a huge influence on Bert, who's now gone on to have huge success in Atlanta. I know you helped a lot when he was working on Kid Kraddick's show. You've always been so incredibly helpful to other people in the industry, which I think is just an amazing quality.
Well, it was fun. I mean, getting into radio in 1982 and being part of a morning radio show in the late 80s into the 90s and beyond, those were great times. And those were the times when a producer did anything and everything for a show. And that's what I love about you, Chachi. That's what I love about Jimmy Barron and the Berts and the Jeff Daulers and all those guys, Dennis Clarks and even Johnny Vega. They all did what they had to do to make those shows a success. And all those shows that we're mentioning actually became legendary because of one constant, and that's a great producer.
Well said. I completely agree. Before we go in, I want to get more into producing here in a few minutes, but tell us a little bit about growing up in Chula Vista. I know you had a pretty tough upbringing. You were raised by a single mom. You lost your dad at 5 years old.
But I didn't know it was tough. I mean, at the time, I had my mom. I never had any grandparents. My dad died when I was 5. All I had was my mom. But as a kid growing up, I didn't know anything different. She gave me a lot of love. She gave me everything I needed. I didn't know I was poor until I was in my 30s. When I looked back in life and went, wait a minute, not everybody stood in line to get that free cheese. You know, not everyone didn't get a gift at Christmas all the time. I didn't know I was poor until I thought about it. And that's why my mom, who is in heaven, is still my hero. You know, through the pandemic, these, last 12, 13 months, people are struggling. Businesses had to rethink. businesses failed, businesses stopped. And I kept on thinking of my mom, what she did to raise 5 children in the 70s on a minimum wage job. So as I was going, okay, how do I reinvent myself? I was thinking, you know what I'm going through or what I'm trying to achieve is nothing compared to a little Guamanian lady, 5 foot nothing, that raised 5 kids in the 70s and did it. And so she's my inspiration no matter what goes on in my life.
That's an incredible story, and I'm sure she was a very strong person and obviously did a remarkable job raising you. Where did your love for radio come from?
I was in high school, and I graduated in 1982, and high school was the best 6 years of my life. That's a joke. And then...
oh, sorry. Best 6 years. I caught that. That's a good one.
It was June of 1982, and I'm getting ready to ditch school. I have my guitar in my right hand and a girl named Caroline Silva on my left arm, and we were ditching school. We were saying, okay, we got 2 more weeks, let's go. And so we were getting ready to leave the property, and my counselor, Mr. Charles Dappert, saw me and said, Tommy, come on over here. He says, hey, since you like music, why don't you go into the cafeteria right now and listen to a disc jockey from KBS 95 talk about a career in radio. Don't ditch with Caroline. Caroline, go back to class. Tommy, you go in the cafeteria. And so I went into the cafeteria and heard a disc jockey named Jonathan Lang talk about radio. And he talked about music. And at the time, I thought there was a great connection. You know, I wanted to be a rock star, so maybe I should get into radio to become a rock star. And then he did a trivia contest. He asked questions about the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Supremes and Elton John. And for some reason, I knew every answer. And he got a kick out of that. And so he called me later on that day at my house with Mr. Dappert, and he said, hey, why don't you and your parents bring you to the radio station tomorrow, and I'll give you a tour. And so my mom drove all the way up 805, you know, from Chula Vista to Kearny Mesa. I've never been to Kearny Mesa before. And I got a tour of the radio station on Convoy Court at the time. And I've been in radio ever since. And that was it. That's how I got in.
I love that story for 2 reasons. One, I feel like high school counselors always get such a crummy rap because they're always blamed for my high school counselor said I couldn't do this, and then I went and proved them wrong. But so that in of itself, that a high school counselor legitimately helped you and found a fantastic career for you. But 2, the fact, and I'm sorry, what was the air personality's name that you saw speak?
Jonathan Lang. And I got to say his name when we got inducted into the National Radio Hall of Fame. I was able to tell that story, and I was able to tell the name of Mr. Charles Dappert, who's in heaven, and to Jonathan Lang, who gave me that start. And it was so cool. But that was 1982. About 20 years after that, you know, as I was thinking about things in life and reflecting, I realized that Jonathan gave a kid in a low-income area raised by a single mom a chance. At the time, for so many years, I thought, oh, I answered so many trivia questions, so he invited me in. No, that's not the case. What he did was he saw something in me, and he realized I'm not in Rancho Santa Fe, and he realized that I was raised by my mom, and he gave me a break. And so that's why I'm forever grateful to Jonathan Lang and to Mr. Charles Dappert. And I do speak at schools today, and I do speak at meetings with counselors. I'm always invited back to talk to counselors at the Sweetwater Union High School District. It's an honor for me to do that.
And I absolutely love that story. So touching, and I can tell that you're emotional. You have mentioned to me that your brothers, unfortunately, were addicted to heroin. Do you think if you had not met Jonathan, if it weren't for the help of your counselor, that you would have maybe gone down the same path?
You know, I often think about that. I'm no angel. I've done my share of drugs. I've never done heroin, but, you know, I grew up in the late 70s and 80s, and, you know, I partied with everybody. But I do think about heroin because heroin, although I've never done it, it's been a big part of my life because, yes, both my older brothers were addicted to heroin. They were heroin addicts. and they were just like in the movies, junkies. But I grew up being an 8-year-old boy, watching them, loving them, hating them, loving them, hating them, loving them, hating them, wishing they were in jail. And then finally, they both got clean late in their life, and they're both in heaven. But my life and seeing that as a young kid, seeing things that you shouldn't see, from, walking in and seeing your brother shooting up, or holding the spoon for them as I'm going to Pop Warner practice. My brother Ray is in the driver's seat. I'm in the passenger seat. I'm holding a spoon with my left hand, staring out of the window, and he's lining up the spoon to cook the heroin. And then when he's done, I say, okay, thank you for the ride. Pick me up in 2 hours. And then I go to practice. I thought everyone did that. I thought every 8-year-old kid saw that. But as I got older, I realized that wasn't what you did and what you saw. As I reflect, I am proud of my brothers for getting clean. And I'm also grateful and thankful for them to give me the wisdom and the knowledge of seeing all that, because it's 2021. And just as you know, Chachi, heroin is back. Heroin is back by way of prescription drugs and Oxycontin and all that. So it's not just a poor neighborhood drug. It's in the middle to upper class neighborhoods. I do speak at juvenile hall, and I tell the story of my family and my brothers, and they all relate. I've never read a book on this. I've never read any manuscript on how to talk to kids about heroin. I just speak from my heart, and they always invite me back. And some of the toughest kids in juvie I see cry when I say that, my mom never did a drug in her life, but my mom died of heroin because of the broken heart she had when both her sons went to heaven.
Your work against addiction work and what you do for people that are in recovery and for kids in school is just absolutely remarkable. And I know you've dedicated a lot of your life and career to that. And the fact that you were able to build and do what you've done and accomplished with so many headwinds, and you could have very easily gone down that same path, it makes your story even that much more special to me. Later in the podcast, I want to get into the documentary that you did and you won a Mark Twain Award for in regards to Oxy. And to your point, yes, you're 100% right. Over 80,000 people a year die in this country of drug overdoses. And it's just, it hasn't gotten as much attention as it really deserves over the last year because of COVID, of course, but it is a top killer in this country. And I believe more young people die of drug overdoses than any other ailments.
And the statistics are even rising even through the pandemic, because of the pandemic. So it's out there.
And I'm excited to hear more about the documentary that you helped produce and create. You met Jonathan Lang. You get to go tour the radio station. How do you parlay that into your first job at a station?
So it's summer of '82. And back then, when you were an intern at a radio station, you can actually be there and hang out there. It wasn't an hourly thing for college credit. So I took advantage of being an intern, and I stayed there literally 18 hours a day. I arrived at 6 and I left at midnight. And for some reason, all the disc jockeys throughout the clock liked me. They taught me, and they would talk with me, and they would show me. And back then, we were just getting out of records. So they were still little turntables in the studio. Carts were the source of playing. We weren't even into CDs yet. And so it was just a fun time. And I just, was like a sponge. I just learned from all the morning shows that came through, all the midday talent, the afternoons, the evenings, the overnights. I learned everything from how to make a cup of coffee at midnight to winding carts. I filed records. When you mention a song from the 60s, 70s, or 80s, I can actually see the record. I can see the cart label. I know intro times. I know cold fades because I see the numbers. And then one day, it was Thanksgiving '82. My boss called me in and said, "Hey, Tommy, Thanksgiving's around the corner. We're thinking about giving all the disc jockeys a day off. How would you like to be on the radio?" And so my first break was doing top of the hour IDs so all the disc jockeys can take a day off for Thanksgiving. So I was there, literally, I think it was a 12-hour shift. And all I did, and I had the world's highest voice. At the top of the hour, right before the top of the hour, I would call my mom and say, Mom, I'm going to talk right now. And then she would listen. And then at the top of the hour, I'd go, KBZT San Diego. And then that was it. And so from that, my voice dropped a little bit and I got a little better. From that, I started scheduling music. And back then, scheduling music literally was pulling albums. I was doing a jazz show called the Moonlight Cafe, and I worked with Art Good on Late Night San Diego, and it would be pulling records. And you would just separate the hours on the floor, and then eventually we went into computers. But back when I started, scheduling music meant pulling records.
45s or full-on
albums.
LPs?
For the jazz, it was albums.
Wow.
For the jazz, it was albums.
When I got into the business, we were on carts and then CDs and then, of course, automation like they have today, play out like an Enco system, for instance. But when you were pulling out a full album, how did you know what track on that album to play?
There would actually be stickers on the tracks not to play.
Oh.
There's like little red or green circles, and it would actually be right there so you couldn't play it.
No kidding.
And there would be little notes, but you would also know. You would just know which ones to play. And I loved it. And honestly, I think, and I'm not just saying this, when I was with Art Good, his engineer and the guy putting his music together, I think I was the very first person to say, hey, you know, it would be good with Grover Washington Jr. Why not play some Steely Dan or Ricky Lee Jones? I think I invented that format.
No way. That's awesome.
But Art Good gets that credit. In a way, I'm kind of joking, but I'm not.
You were there producing. You certainly were an
Yes.
influence, without a doubt. So at this point, I know when you're in high school and you're ditching class, you really want to be a rock star. But now, does your idea of, hey, maybe I should go into radio, when does it start to kind of click that this is where you want to go now with your career?
I fell in love with radio and the fact that they gave me a salary early in my life. When I was 19, I'll never forget, a guy named Tim Hankey called me in and he said, hey, Tommy, we're going to give you a title. I think I was called like programming coordinator at 19, and you can schedule the jocks, and we're going to give you a salary of $10,000 a year. And then I said, dude, yes. Yes, let's do it. And so I was so happy at that. And because I just had a bunch of great people from the front office to the sales department, to the disc jockeys, to the program directors and engineers, they all were nice to me. So I just wanted to be in radio. And quite honestly, I never really played guitar again. And so I just loved radio. And, you know, from 82 to 88, it was all about just learning stuff and just being there and being a sponge. Just like you, there's a certain breed of a person that just understands that. You have it, obviously, you know, the Berts, the Jimmy Barons, the Johnny Vegas, all those guys, they understood that. And I'm grateful to be even thought of in that category with you guys.
Well, and your work ethic is stunning. I mean, you know, 18-hour days, and you always were the first person at the station and the last person to leave. Incredibly impressive. And I remember when we got to at least, you know, work together, and when we were at KFMB, you were always sending me ideas at all hours of the night and day, and you just were always, and I'm sure it's still like this to this day, but you were just always thinking about putting on a great show and what you can do to make the station sound better.
Oh, yeah. And as you know, with what you're doing today, you probably can't turn it off. I bet you're working all the time, and it's hard to just turn it off. So, yes, when your on-air shift is 6 to 10, you cannot be successful if you work 6 to 10. If you are on the air, you know, 6 to 10, 10 to 3, 3 to 7, 7 to midnight, overnights, you got to work the whole day. And it's a different way of thinking. To be a great producer, to be a great on-air personality, no matter what, even when you're driving and you see something, okay, I saw that. Okay, that's going to be good tomorrow. So write that down.
Yeah.
Or when you watch TV, the thing that you just saw on television, that'd be good. All day long. Or if your little kid or grandkid now did something, okay, write that down. all day long, we're still producing. And that's what makes a producer and an on-air personality great.
100% right. Always collecting and gathering information, and how you can take that information and turn it into a bit, or turn it in my case, into a product or an ad or
an empire.
An empire. Yeah.
The Chachi Empire.
So talking about empires, that's a great segue, and why you're such a fantastic producer. How do you meet Jeff and Jer? How does that all come together at Y95?
The Jeff and Jer era started May 3rd, 1988. Prior to that, I was playing jazz at night on a station called K-Light 94.9, the same frequency. And we were an AC station, but at night we were a contemporary jazz from 7 to midnight. And the show was called the Moonlight Cafe, and I was part of that. Then all of a sudden, we were going to change the name of the station and hire a really good morning show. And so the station was going to be called Y95. They went searching for talent. And there were 2 guys that were out of work from Chicago. The last station they worked at was WFYR, and they were on the beach for about a year. And so Jeff and Jer were the ones that Pam Finn, my boss at the time, hired. And when they came into the radio station prior to May 3rd, sometime in March or April, I was there. And I remember meeting Jeff and Jer for the first time. And Pam saying, "Hey, Jeff, this is Tommy. He does a lot of production here. He does a lot of music here. I think I'm going to try to make him help you guys when you first arrive." And Tommy plays guitar. And then I'll always remember Jeff said, "Awesome, we should get together. I play tuba." And so that was it. And then when I met Jerry for the first time at that moment, he actually handed me one of those recorders. I forget what they're called, but it's a hand recorder where if you have an idea, you just record into it.
Oh, like a dictaphone?
Yeah, that thing.
Yeah.
And he handed that to me, and he goes, "Hey, if you ever have an idea, record into this, and then we'll share ideas."
And it had the little cassettes, right?
Yeah. That's what he handed to me. And then our very first show was May 3rd, 1988. At 5:30 a.m., the station flipped from K-Light 94.9 to Y95. And I'll always remember I was sitting in another studio across them, and I could see them. And their first words out of their mouth, Jerry said, "Blues 95." Ladies and gentlemen, I know there's a lot of people out there listening to the change of the radio station, and we're going to be a blues station. We're called Blues 95. He was just kidding, but he goes, "Now our names are Jeff and Jer. That's Hank Bauer on sports, Ashley Gardner on news. We're a brand new radio show, and hopefully we're going to make you laugh and make you smile." Then 5 minutes later, something happened in the city of Chula Vista. Some guy gets stuck in the mud, and Jeff and Jer say, "Hey, what was your name again?" "Tommy." "Hey, Tommy, do you know anyone in Chula Vista?" And then I said, "Yeah, everyone." I grew up in Chula Vista. And they go, "Well, can you get someone to go to the car that's stuck in the mud and do a play-by-play from a payphone?" From the payphone.
Yeah, right. It's before cell phones.
Yeah. And then I made that happen. They were just very impressed that I made that happen. And then the next day, something else happened. Like something happened at the zoo. And then they said, "Tommy, do you know anyone at the zoo?" And luckily I knew someone at the zoo. And then the next day, something happened. "Tommy, do you know anyone at City Hall?" And luckily I did. And I just got lucky. From that, they said, "Hey, you know what? We like you." And every time they needed something, I did it.
That's amazing because of your connections and your resourcefulness. And I remember, again, coming up and learning so much from you, but your Rolodex was just absolutely amazing. I mean, whether it was an A-list celebrity or a government official, I mean, it seemed like you knew absolutely everyone. And if you didn't know them, you knew someone who could get a hold of them.
And I don't know how. I mean, it's true. I lucked out. I got lucky. But yes, every time something was in the news, I had it or I just knew how to get it.
They call that today, you're a connector. And I mean, that is such a phenomenal skill set to have. But was that just something that came naturally to you?
Yeah. And back then, we didn't have Google. We had 411. So if Dave Dennis made the news, I would have to call 411 and get all the Dave Dennis's in that area and call each one. Hey, are you the one that just, did that? Hey, are you the one that just did that? That's how we had to do it. And that's where I kind of got my work ethic and knowing how to find people. Even today, I still, I keep up with how to do things with Google and social media and all that. But I love watching television now. And if I see a movie, for example, Cinderella Man with Russell Crowe, as I'm watching the movie and he's portraying that character, those little boys of his, the real little kids, they were like 8 years old. They must be 80 or 90 by now. So what I'll do is I'll try to find them before the movie's over. And I remember watching Cinderella Man, and I ended up finding one of the little boys who's an old man now. I often play games like that, or not games, but just
no, it is. It's like you're a connector, and you're also like the thrill of the chase. It's going and trying to. It's almost like a treasure hunt.
And it's also an art form. I believe anybody can find someone, anybody can email someone, but it's how you do it. It's how. There's so many people during the political race, so many A-listers that I got a hold of, but I truly believe they said yes to going on television or on radio because I think they liked me. And I think you have to find someone or to get someone on. You can't just say, "Dear Chachi, I work at KUSI TV. Can you Zoom with us tomorrow?" There's got to be a little more pizzazz, or just in 3 sentences, they got to like you.
Absolutely right. So it's not only the fact that you could track them down, have the intelligence and the connectivity to do that, but you also do have to have a charm, almost a romance to be able to get them on air with you and to be comfortable with you. We have to realize that these celebrities, and I've had people come and want to do podcasts with us or do shows with us, and they think that just getting these people on the air is something that's incredibly easy to do, and it's the polar opposite of that. They have so many opportunities to be on the biggest television shows and now the biggest podcasts, and to try to secure someone of the notoriety that you've done time and time and time again is exceptionally difficult to do.
One time when, remember when Heidi Fleiss was in the news?
Sure.
Well, I remember for some reason I ended up getting her new home number. Her new home number. I had her new home number. And this was when she was in the news, when there were people coming, she was naming people on the list back to back to back.
At that time, it was better to have her number as opposed to her having your number.
Yes. But I remember I called her and she said yes to going on the air. And she went on the air, and I'll always remember this. At the very end, she goes, "Hey, by the way, I don't know how you got my number," she goes, "I don't know how you got my number because I don't even know this number. So whoever you have as a contact, you better keep them." And I'll always remember that. That was so cool.
Would you reveal your trick when, for instance, you called Heidi Fleiss? How were you able to convert a call that she was not expecting and be able to take that in a conversation and get her on air with Jeff and Jer?
And it goes back to they have to like you or hear something in your voice. For example, I probably said something like, "Hi, Heidi. My name's Tommy. I work at a radio station in San Diego. I'm sorry for calling you, but is there any way you can please just say hello to Jeff and Jer real quick? We're just a nice little radio station. We just want to say hello to you," or something similar to that. And sometimes they'll just say, "Sure, why not?" I've got lucky where I had Johnny Carson on his last day.
Wow.
On the air, and I had Jay Leno on his last day. And I'll always remember Johnny Carson. I think that was 1991?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
I had his home number, and I called him, and I said, first of all, they pick up the phone. This is landlines back then. And I go, "Johnny, Mr. Carson, my name is Tommy Sablan from a radio station in San Diego. Can we just say congratulations and, thank you for all you do?" And of course he's going to say sure. And I always remember he said, "Sure, why not?" And then he went on the air with Jeff and Jer, and he almost gave his monologue because that night when I watched his monologue, that last night of his, he said almost the exact same thing he did with Jeff and Jer earlier.
No way.
So he was like practicing. And then Jay Leno, out of like the 40 times I would call Jay Leno over the years, he would say no, but sometimes he would be in a good mood and say yes.
So great, man. So great. What was that? Is it like scoring a touchdown is that the feeling? What's that adrenaline like?
Yes. It's an adrenaline like no other. It's where I score. It's the producer scoring the touchdown. Yes, everyone says, "Oh my gosh, how did Jeff and Jer just did a great interview with George Clooney. Wow." But in reality, it's the producer. But a good producer also can put their ego aside. I made a living out of helping Jeff and Jer become legendary, in my opinion. And I truly believe they are legendary. And I've always had the attitude of making them the best they can be. And because of that, they did the same for me in return. If you have someone in a producer's situation or in my situation or how your situation when you were at Star 100.7, if your focus was making yourself great or making yourself the one in the spotlight, then I believe you fail. You fail in that producer's role. But it's my opinion that a producer can make a very good living. You can make a living out of producing. Many times, some of my heroes in radio don't understand what a producer is. Or the bosses, the general managers say, hey, let's get that kid out of high school or college that we just hired. Hey, let's make them a producer. Or, hey, that person that just walked into the building, let's make them a producer. You should make the most talented person in the building the producer. That's my opinion.
I agree with you 100%. And you say it so eloquently, and you're absolutely right. It is vital. I believe without a great producer, most of the talent that are out there could not be who they are. And I think people forget that to be a Jeff and Jer, to be a Howard Stern, to be a Kid Kraddick, or all the Rick Dees, all the legends that we grew up and listened to, a Scott Shannon, it was absolutely imperative that they had a fantastic producer. And you, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, I believe are the absolute gold standard when it comes to producing. Let's dive into Jeff and Jer, because without a doubt, complete legends and had just an eye-popping, amazing career in San Diego. When did you realize that the show was a success? Was there a moment where you're like, this is really working?
There was a moment that I always remember early where I went, whoa, okay, this is pretty cool. So we started May 3rd, 1988. I was making nothing. And I remember calling the bank to say, hey, I'm going to be a little late with my car payment.
Wow.
And I remember calling, and then the woman on the other end got excited and said, oh my gosh, you're little Tommy. They go, oh my God, I listened to you guys. I was embarrassed and proud at the same time.
Did she repossess the car, or did she give you a little bit more time?
She did her job, and she gave me the 2 weeks.
Oh, that's awesome.
Then I realized, okay, I better not do that anymore. And then just going to parties. There was our first Halloween party, October 31st, obviously, 1988. We gave away free tickets. We passed out tickets everywhere we went. When I was on the road, I gave away tickets on the radio, gave away tickets, dropped them off at a 7-Eleven. And the formula is probably about a third of those people will go. And when we had that party at the San Diego Marriott, the crowd was wrapped around the building like 4 times.
Oh my gosh.
The police called police dogs to come to help with control. And it was crazy. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, there's something going on here.
So you guys had given out, let's say, 10,000 tickets, thinking that a little over 3,000 would show up, but in actuality, all 10,000 showed up.
Or more.
Oh my God.
And I remember in meetings prior to the Halloween party, I remember specifically Pam Finn, our program director, said, okay, yeah, there's 10,000 tickets. So yes, the formula is, we're going to expect about 2,000 to 3,000 people if we're lucky. All of San Diego showed up. The Jeff and Jer show, as the years went on and on, the configuration of our show stayed the same, but the nucleus of Jeff and Jer and myself was always there. And then at the end, it was, of course, Randy, who I love very much, and Laura and Emily. But there were so many people there, and we wouldn't be so successful without our listeners. We were a listener-based show. We made them the stars. The stars of the Jeff and Jer show were the listeners.
You were always so promotion oriented and the phenomenal things. And let's talk a little bit about talking about listeners and helping out the community. So many events, but I remember Becky's House and how involved you were with that. Tell me a little bit about breaking and entering Christmas and how that came to be.
Becky's House, obviously you were part of that. I remember it was 1999 when we were taking phone calls with our guest, Barbara DeAngelis. And I remember a woman, I can't say her real name, but she gave me her real name and she told me off the air, Tommy, my boyfriend's out of town and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get out of this relationship. And then I said, hey, Jeff, hey, Jerry, we got this woman on. Let's talk to her. And they go, hey, let's talk to her off the air. Off the air, let's get her in touch with Barbara. And then for some reason, I said, I don't think so. I go, I think we need to talk to this woman on the radio. And then they said, okay, Tommy, if you say so. And so I gave her the name Becky, and she went on, and she started talking about how her boyfriend is out of town. She had a little 8-year-old boy, and she didn't know how to leave. She didn't have any money, and she wanted to go from her abusive relationship. And then, for some reason, phone calls came in, and our listeners embraced her and loved her and wanted to root for her. And then the very next morning, unsolicited, a man came to the KFMB building and had like $20 and said, hey, I was listening yesterday. We put this on the air, and here's $20 to help that woman. And then another person heard that and came in. And then another person, and then another person. By the time 10 o'clock in the morning came around, in that one morning, the next day, we had over $50,000.
Amazing.
$50,000 for Becky. And then we had to get an attorney to have a trust fund. And then from that, council member Barbara Warden called and said, hey, we were listening to this. We have $1 million earmarked for something like this. Wow. And they gave us $1 million. And that was for the start of Becky's House. And then the Jingle Balls that you were very much part of. Becky's House was a Star 100.7 team effort, which included you.
And such an amazing organization. Is it still around today, little Tommy?
Yeah, Becky's House, there are now 2 unmarked locations. Now it's run by the YWCA.
That's amazing.
But I still get calls. I still get a call from people saying, hey, how do I get a hold of Becky's House, or I have things to donate? So I feel very proud that we're still connected to that.
And the countless women and families and children that you've helped.
And pets.
Wow.
Pets stay at Becky's House.
I didn't know that. So the pets can go as well.
Yes.
That's amazing.
And when they leave, they get everything. They take all the furniture with them.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Tell me, how did Breaking and Entering Christmas come to be? This was your brainchild and now something that is copied in other markets, but originated with you.
With permission, it is copied everywhere, and it's so cool. So it's 1996, and we get a phone call on the radio. We were at Q106 at the time, and it's around December, and a man that just lost his job called in, and he was on the air, and he says, hey, I'm not looking for any handouts. I'm not looking for any freebies, but I have 2 little girls and Christmas is around the corner and I just need a job interview. Can you help me get a job? I do construction. And then from that, phones lit up and we got the guy a job interview that same morning. And when I told him off the air the information, he said he lived nearby the studio and that he knew where the location for the interview was. And so he left. So I said to Jeff and Jer, hey, he's right around the corner, right by Kmart. How about if I go to Kmart and get a tree and get some Barbies and a bike and stuff and sneak into the guy's house? And they said, go for it. This was all off the air.
Right.
And so I go to Kmart off the air. I remember getting 2 girl bikes, some Barbies, some candy, some food, milk. I remember I got a bunch of stuff. And then I went to the guy's house on the air now. And at the time, I was a lot skinnier, so I jumped through the window. I broke into the house. When I got the tree, and I set up the tree and all the gifts and the bike, and then I locked up and left. And then when that guy came home, he called me and he goes, hey, did you do that? And I denied it. And then for some reason I told Jeff and Jer, I go, hey, let's call this Breaking and Entering Christmas. And then every year since then, we do that. And I don't break in literally now. I do get help from a family member, but it has grown and grown. And now, I have car dealerships helping. I have furniture places helping. I have so many friends. What used to be just 1 or 2 or 3 people helping me is now like 100 people. And I'm proud to say, even during the pandemic, we did it. We still did it.
Absolutely amazing. I just have the size of your heart is immense. And I know you work closely with the late Tony Gwynn and the late Junior Seau with their foundations. And you've done so many things just in your time in San Diego to serve the community. And it's really not stopped pretty much since the very inception of Jeff and Jer all the way through what you're doing now. It's a huge part of what you do. And I think that speaks volumes of who you are as a human being.
But I learned it working at all the radio stations and learned it from our listeners and from our war meetings, Chachi.
That's right, the war meetings.
Star 100.7, Chachi, let me tell you this. Out of all the stations, from 1988 to 1990, Jeff and Jer, we were at Y95. 1990 to 93, we were at B100. 93 to 97, Q106. 97 to 2005, we were at Star 100.7. 2005 to 2009, we were at Star 94.1. From 2009 to 2011, we were on the beach. And then we were on Kixie for the remainder of the years. But it is my opinion, 1997 to 2005 at Star 100.7, that was the best radio team ever.
Man, I was part of that team, and I selfishly 100% agree with you. When you think of the talent and the way that station operated, I think Tracy Johnson is a brilliant programmer. Started with, I think one of the greatest morning shows ever, Jeff and Jer, and you, of course.
And prior to us, there was Smiley, right? Smiley was prior to us.
Yeah, and Smiley's still doing really well he's at ZPL in Indianapolis and doing well there. But yeah, you've got, by the way, so middays, Greg Sims, he works out here at LA at K-Earth. He's still on the air doing very, very well. Jagger and Kristi, who does mornings in San Diego at Magic and are doing well. You had Rick Morton with you at one point. Rick does mornings at Z90.
Z90. Everybody you just mentioned, I still keep in contact with. And I talk to Greg all the time.
Yeah, so many people that have just gone on.
And then the new guy, and then I forget his producer.
Yeah, his producer was a nobody, but yeah,
I forget his name.
The new guy's doing well. He's in Nashville, working at Warner Brothers.
But his producer was you.
Yeah,
and honestly, the most successful person to come out of that group.
No, man, I
appreciate
you.
No, it's you. I remember Kristi. I had lunch with Kristi 5 years ago. And I said, hey, how's everyone doing? And she said something like, hey, you know Chachi, right? And I go, yeah, what about him? The dude has an empire.
Yeah, right.
He's like Bill Gates successful. Right. And I go, really?
I think it's safe to say that you and Jeff and Jer have made a few more bucks than me. I've done okay, but I think you guys were the most successful to come out of that group. And
I don't know about that.
Such an honor to be able to work with you there. And I have to ask, and I think what set you apart from so many other producers, one of many things that set you apart, but the way at least you came off on air was the Squawk Box. Whose idea was that?
I'm staring at my Squawk Box right now. My kids for Christmas actually framed it for me.
No, that's great.
It's in my living room now, but I actually have about 20 to 30 Squawk Boxes because towards the end, Radio Shack stopped making them. So I had to go online. Yeah. So I purchased a bunch of them because they broke down easily. And it's just a $12 Squawk Box. And I believe it was Jeff and Jer's idea just to give me a different sound, but it did have that pop. It had like that click.
As soon as you heard that, you couldn't stop but help and listen. You had every time you came on, and your timing was impeccable, but that Squawk Box just added that extra punch. It made it great.
You know what's so cool? When I listen to Howard Stern, Gary's on a Squawk Box.
That's right.
I came up before Gary.
That is unbelievable. That's a great point.
Yeah, so I always tell people, even though it may not even be true, I always tell people, hey, they got that for me.
They had to have. They had to have gotten that from you. Such a quintessential sound of the show. Hey, do me a favor too, if you don't mind, little Tommy. Send us a picture of the framed Squawk Box because I want to add that to the show notes so people can see that. I want to get into what you're doing now and at KUSI and so forth. But I remember when we were broadcasting from the roller coaster, from the Whirl to Your Hurl, and that turned out to be a huge promotion. And I remember some of the contestants were actually on Jay Leno's show. It became so big, which I'm sure you had something to do with. And you guys were broadcasting live from down there. And I remember when you asked me to be the board op, and I got to board op Jeff and Jer's show while you were all down at the roller coaster. And I was absolutely beside myself in excitement.
Now you own the board.
Yeah. So in the middle of all this success and this amazing run, I know that you also had some personal issues that came up, and you had a divorce in 2003. And I love how transparent you are. Obviously, feel free to talk about what you're comfortable with, and if you're not. But you go on to tell me, at least in the notes that you sent, that your life changed then.
Well, yeah. I mean, I have no regrets at all. Yes, I was married for 9 years, 6 months, 23 days. And honestly, my lovely ex-wife helped my career a lot. You know, those early days, B100 and Q106, she helped me think of ideas, and she was right there. So I have no regrets, and I thank her for that. And I have no regrets about being married and getting a divorce, because I have 3 beautiful kids. I have a stepdaughter named Amanda. I have my son, Eddie, who's now 24, and my daughter, Vanessa, she's now 26. They're all Q106 babies.
That's amazing.
And I have 3 grandkids. I have 2 step grandkids, and I hate using the word step, but Vanessa's daughter is Olivia, and Olivia's everything.
Congratulations.
My granddaughter, Olivia, she is almost 3. That's all I care about and live for. And I love it. So I have no regrets about being married.
That's great. And your kids are all down in San Diego?
Eddie actually still lives nearby me. I never see him, although he did pop in today, and I got to wave at him.
Oh, good.
And he's a great skateboarder. If you Google Eddie Sablan, Sablan, or go to YouTube, you can see him do some great skateboarding.
Oh, that's all. I'll check it out for sure.
Yeah. And then my daughter, Vanessa, she's up in Temecula raising my granddaughter. She's married to a guy named Dustin Hoffman.
No way. Are you serious?
Yeah. His name's Dustin Hoffman.
That's funny. Temecula is a beautiful area. My parents live very close to there.
Yes.
So congratulations on Olivia. I see you post pictures quite a bit on Instagram, and absolutely beautiful family. Have you remarried?
You know what? I have not. And, I often think about that. Everyone always says, hey, Tommy, why don't you remarry? I'm having fun right now, just living my life. I still work hard. You know, when the Jeff and Jer show ended June of 2017, I had to reinvent myself. I didn't want to be, oh, that's Tommy with Jeff and Jer. Hey, Tommy with Jeff and Jer. I had to reinvent myself, and I wanted to reinvent myself, and it was exciting. So Entercom hired me immediately after we left the Jeff and Jer show. And then January 2018, iHeartRadio hired me to work at KGB and to help out all the other shows. And so I've been with iHeartRadio in San Diego since then. And also I started working on television.
Yeah, I want to get into that. Prior to we getting TV and what you're doing now at iHeart, what did that feel like when Jeff and Jer finally did decide to hang up their headphones? Because it was such an epic run, and the success that you had you really dominated San Diego for close to 30 years.
Oh, yeah. And in reality, Jerry decided to hang up his headphones, but we stayed together about 1.5 years after that. And one day we did our show, and I'll never forget, we got called into a meeting after our show at 10. And the general manager at the time at Kixie said, hey, that was your last show.
Oh, man.
Then as he's talking to us, I remember I was texting Bob Bollinger. As the GM was firing us, I was actually texting another GM at another station, Bob Bollinger. And I already had a meeting set to see Bob before we were even told to leave the studio.
Wow.
And I have no regrets. It's business. We lasted almost 30 years. I used to be a little mad at that dude that fired us, but not anymore. He's actually married to my cousin.
No, are you serious?
Yeah. But I don't even want to say his name.
All right.
It happens in radio. Hello. I mean, everyone gets blown out, and we got blown out, and that was it. Oh, yeah. I did try to get the show hired at another company in San Diego. And so for 2 months after we were let go, I was the one that had to do the presentations. I was the one that had to see the GM and say, hey, here's why I think you should hire us. And I remember the person I told the presentation to told me to meet him at Denny's. And he goes, Tommy, thank you for all you did for that presentation. And he said, we're not going to hire the show, but we want to hire you.
Wow.
I told the show and I said, hey, what do we do? And then everyone said, you know what? We're all going to find our own thing. And so that was it. And then Jeff got a great gig. I think Jeff was first. He got a great gig at K-Love.
Yeah, so he moved up to Sacramento, correct?
Yeah, and he had a good run there. Emily Griffiths is now on Rock 105 with the show with Eddie Papani.
Oh my gosh, Eddie, and that's fantastic. Yeah, Eddie was part of the original Star crew.
Yeah, Randy is taking care of his family, and Laura is at iHeart, and she's doing traffic, and she's heard on Star 94.1. And then there's me. Jerry's lived right and is well retired and living a good life. And Jeff is in Tennessee, and he's about a couple days away from retiring as well. They've had long, good careers. And
that's fantastic. And you guys all keep in touch quite regularly?
Yeah, we joke around from time to time. We're still in a group text. But the one thing I didn't want to do is be known as Tommy with Jeff and Jer all my life. Although I'm proud of it. Every day of my life, someone mentions Jeff and Jer. But I wanted to do something for myself, and I think I did it.
Yeah, let's talk about, fill me in first on how you transitioned into television, because I find this fascinating. Not only did you transition, but you won a Mark Twain Award doing it. So first tell me about what you do at KUSI.
What I do at iHeartRadio and KUSI is almost combined together, all in one. As I'm working at KUSI, producing there, I'll get a phone call from like Cliff Albert or Mark Larson or someone, Mary Ayala at iHeart, and they'll need a guest. So everything I do today works for TV and radio, because at this very moment, I book all the guests for KUSI, and from that, iHeart, uses me. And so I can get anyone at this moment. If something happens in San Diego at this very moment, from a political thing to something in immigration to schools reopening, doctor, if you need a doctor, I can get someone on the show in a half a second. What I do at KUSI and iHeart are almost the same thing. But how I got into television was back in 2010, I saw a seminar by the Sheriff's Department on drugs in our schools. And I didn't know this. I thought drugs in high school was just weed and drinking beer. Little did I know about the prescription drug epidemic. So after I left that seminar that talked about how heroin and OxyContin is back, I went to KUSI and I said, hey, you guys need to do a documentary on this. I went to the general manager's office and he said, Tommy, we're going to do this, but we're not going to do it. You're going to do it. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, you have the keys. Go ahead and produce it. And I go, but I don't do television. And he goes, just do it. And so I produced a television documentary, and it was called Oxy, What Your Kids Aren't Telling You. And it was up for a local Emmy, but we didn't win, but we did get a Mark Twain Award. And I'm so proud of that.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Would you mind sending us the link to that? Because I'd love to include it in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's called Oxy, What Your Kids Aren't Telling You. And it's about what's going on in our schools and in San Diego about drugs and heroin. And everything that was done in 2010 is still the same today, sadly.
Oh, man.
Everything we talked about then is still happening today.
What a shame. Is there any progress being made towards this epidemic?
Honestly, I hate to say, no.
Such a shame, and unfortunately such a terrible disease. And I know it's something that's impacted you personally with your brothers. Tell me a little bit about your own sobriety. You've been sober now for over 13 years.
As I was yelling at my brothers for doing heroin, as I look back, I was a hypocrite, because that was like the late 70s, early 80s. I'm a teenager. And back then, I was snorting cocaine and crystal. But I didn't know that was bad. I didn't know that was just as bad back then, because in the late 70s, early 80s, it was almost accepted. it was accepted. Doing cocaine, snorting cocaine was accepted, so I didn't know I was being a hypocrite to my brothers. And as the decades went by, I thought about it and I felt so bad. Here I am as the good son, the nice one, but no, I wasn't. I was just as bad, but I just didn't do heroin. I apologized to my brothers, and, later in life, they did get clean. And then I decided, after I was invited to speak at juvenile hall and schools, telling people the story of my brothers, I wanted to be true to that. And so I stopped everything. And so I stopped getting high. I stopped snorting coke and crystal. And I was clean and sober, because when I go to schools, I can tell them, hey, I did it, but I don't anymore.
Good for you, man. That's amazing. And I know you've actually given a TED Talk at Donovan State Prison about this subject.
Yeah. To do a TED Talk at Donovan, it's on YouTube, by the way.
Please send us the link as well, and I'll include those in the show notes.
And I got to hang out at Donovan State Prison. It was in the A yard. I hung out for 3 weeks prior to the TED Talk because we worked together with the inmates. There were 5 people on the outside. I was one of them. And there were 5 inmates that did a TED Talk. So we all helped each other. And so I got to go to prison and hang out with the inmates without any security. I'm sure they were watching, but we just hung out. And I'll always remember the person that was doing the TED Talk in charge. They said, hey, whatever you do, don't Google. Don't find out what they are in for. And I did.
Of course.
And, I feel guilty as I'm saying, hey, that guy's nice. Wow, what a great time I had with this guy. Wow, we're learning how to do our speeches. What a nice guy. They weren't. And I feel very bad that I was saying that, because they hurt people.
I guess my question, though, is can people be rehabilitated? And I know our penitentiary system is quite different than what's found, for instance, in Europe. And it's not uncommon for people that have committed very severe, even crimes such as murder, actually do get released and re-enter society in Europe. And I'm not condoning one or the other, but there seems to be some facts towards that people can truly be rehabilitated. Do you feel?
I cannot talk to you about my assumption of someone in prison getting rehabilitated, but I can tell you from firsthand, someone that was using drugs can be rehabilitated. My brothers, when I was growing up, you were told, hey, if you do heroin, you can't stop doing heroin. There's something about opiates. There's something about heroin that gets your soul. I truly believe today, if you're smoking weed, you can stop smoking weed by just stop smoking weed. If you're using heroin, if you're using Oxycontin, you can't just stop. You can't. And it's not the addiction, it's your soul. There's the opioids. It gets your soul. And that's what happened to my brothers. And for the longest time, I was wanting my brothers to go to jail and go to prison to be clean. They proved me wrong. I didn't think they would get clean at all, but both of them proved me wrong, and they had the strongest willpower to quit. So my answer to you is yes, people can get rehabilitated when it comes to drug use, and people can change.
So inspired by the work that you are doing towards addiction and this documentary. I'm definitely going to check it out. I thank you for it, because I agree with you, and addiction is something that impacts virtually every family in this country, and is absolutely something that needs more attention and money donated to the cause to help so many people that are suffering from this horrific disease. And I applaud you not only on all the work you've done, but also with your own sobriety, because I know that's incredibly difficult to do, and something that you believe so much so, and can be introspective and call yourself out as a hypocrite takes a lot, says a lot about your character.
When I speak at juvie, I don't say, hey, don't do drugs. They know that. I just tell them what I did and what my life is and what happened, and then they can make their own decision. Because, if you're listening right now and you want to continue to get high, that's your choice. But I can tell you my story to make you think.
Let's wrap this up on a fun note. You also, in addition to your producing responsibilities for KUSI and for iHeart, are also have a weekend, I believe, show called On the Air with Sully, Little Tommy, and Russ. Tell me about that.
I went in about a year and a half ago. I had an idea, and I went into the general manager's office of the television station and said, hey, I know every morning show in San Diego. How about if I do a show with them? Each day I'll have a morning show and we'll just put it on television. That was my original idea. And then he goes, how about if you just do it yourself and call Sully and maybe you guys can just do a radio show on television? And I said, okay. And that was it.
That's great.
I do a show called On the Air with Sully, Little Tommy, and Rusty Nails. We're just three old radio dudes, and we invite all our friends that are on the radio or have been on the radio or on television, and we just talk about radio. And it's on YouTube, but it's on KUSI Saturday mornings at 11, and they just added midnight.
That's great, man. That's fantastic.
Friday at midnight, and it's kind of cool because, you know, we all have faces for radio. You know, I put on a few pounds during this pandemic, but it's so funny. It's so funny to say that I have a television show.
What a blast. That's great. That's great. Have you had has Jeff and Jer been on, or Laura, or Randy?
Laura has, Emily has. I'm going to invite Randy soon. And Jeff and Jer, I'm trying to get them to come in for like a big reunion. But we've had everyone from the DSC, who I love, and they're my favorite morning show today, to Eddie's show. We've had everyone on.
Oh, that's fantastic.
We got to have you on, Chachi.
I would love to do it. I would be absolutely honored, man. And in talking about being honored, I am so grateful to have you on this show. I really just appreciate you sharing, your history and your childhood, but just everything that you've done for this industry. And I would love to kind of just get your thoughts as we're wrapping up here on radio. Where do you think we need to go as an industry, as a medium?
I love radio. Everybody always says that to me about, hey, what happened to radio? Is radio dead? No, radio is bigger and better than ever. It just looks different. You know, 30 years ago, radio was your car stereo and that little thing you had next to your bed, or the stereo in your living room. That was old radio. Today, radio is the cell phone I'm looking at right now. You know, podcasts. This, what you are doing right now, Chachi, is radio. Social media is radio. Facebook, keeping in touch on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. That's radio. When you have a great show, they're on all of that stuff. When you have a morning show, they're just not on that frequency. They're on social media. So radio is bigger and better than ever. And people that are my age that came up in radio in the 70s and 80s, if they don't get that, they're going to dinosaur out. You got to know the definition of radio. You know, what you're doing for the industry, Chachi, you get it and everything. So I'm inspired. Radio had the toughest year ever in 2020, but there's light now. Companies are now bringing people back in. Everyone's used to Zooming now, but, you know, the doors are finally starting to open up. So I'm actually inspired by where radio is going and what they went through, because what we all went through in 2020 is going to make us better down the line.
So well put, man. I 100% agree with you. You're an inspiration, and thank you for everything you've done, not only for the industry and for the community with Becky's House and Breaking and Entering Christmas, with the horrible drug addiction pandemic that we have in this country, but also for what you've done for me. There is no doubt that we would not be where we are today, Benztown as a company, if it weren't for your support in my early days of the business. So
I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you.
Thank you, my friend.
Love you.
Love you too.